Now we turn to Europe, and here you can see we want to kick off with some of the key pieces, especially on the leading indicators, as well as what the data has been showing. So for the Eurozone composite PMI, the survey was for 54, actual was 51.9. Still growth, but again, you see the direction in which it's moving, which is why we do see more pressure coming forward, especially when you start looking at the Eurozone consumer confidence. 3-month average is going to showing that pull down in household spending, which as that again kicks all the way through, and we're going to talk a lot about wages in this segment and how that is going to and has already impeded a significant amount of spending and economic activity, that we continue to see the European Union already in a recession. Financial stress lifting the Eurozone borrowing costs, and that's when you start seeing those borrowing costs go up. It's going to, again, impede additional growth. So we're going to talk about wages. We're going to talk about the consumer, but this is also going to hit the corporate side. The investment, the I in GDP is going to come under pressure because the interest expense of borrowing is going to be prohibitive in terms of what companies can borrow, what they can deploy. So they'll have to cut CapEx, they'll have to cut investment, they'll be looking to maybe cut jobs and just downsize to manage some of these increased costs. The Eurozone industrial confidence was expected at 4.8, came in at 7.4. The Eurozone economic confidence was expected at 103, came in at 104. So there's some bright spots. It's not all negative all the time. There is some of this in terms of industrial confidence, but in the industrial side, they still have a decent backlog of exports that have to be filled, just given where they are. The impacts. The U.S. Went into had the inflationary push early. Europe is following now, but there's still that backlog that the U.S. has filled that Europe is still trying to kind of catch up on itself, which is providing some of that uplift on the industrial side. But when you start looking at tourism as the GDP driver and just the pressure in terms of flights, and that's just speaking cost, but also just in general travel, when you think about how much of a headache it is to travel. Everyone's COVID restrictions are different. Do you need a test? Do you not need a test? Do you have to be fully vaccinated? Do you not? Do you need a booster? Not need a booster? People are like, you know what? I'm not dealing with it. I'll figure it out later. And that, again, is creating more pressure on the tourism side, which is a big piece of a lot of these GDPs, which, again, is just another negative impact when we're looking at the Eurozone strength. Now, when we start talking about the wage side, German effective wages and Deutsche Bank's wage pressure index continues to grow when you look at the pressure on the consumer. So when you look at where have we been here before? Yes, in 1993. So when you look at the pressure side, but then when you look at the WPI or the wage pressure index as measured by Deutsche Bank, we've never been here before. So the effective wages, again, showing the pressure it is impacting as wages go up on the underlying corporation in terms of how are they going to do that. But Eurozone PMI will fall below 50 in Q3. So when you start looking at the pressure in terms of how that's going to impact as wages on a real level are negative, so effective wages have gone up, but real wages have come down, but yet wage pressure index is up. Again, those different impacts which are driving down a lot of this activity, which we see on the consuming side, which is why we do agree that the consumer composite PMI will be negative to kick off Q3, which is obviously in July. So now when we turn to Germany, the German business expectations, the expectation was for 87.4, came in at 85.8. But then when you start looking at, okay, expectations in Germany are coming down, the largest entity in Europe, EUROAREA, the change in distribution of inflation components. When you look at it, there are a huge number of components that are driving or are over or rising over the five-year mean, and you're seeing this huge move up, which is why now again inflation is starting to crest, but it doesn't mean that it's negative, and we're going to continue to see this move up. And back to the point on the U.S. and that some of that bullwhip components. we import inflation as well, and a lot of the nations we import from are seeing a big pressure, are seeing a lot of these issues in terms of where pricing is, in terms of where some of the underlying inflationary pressures, which they'll try to pass through, and the U.S. is going to import, which again is going to lead to more of those problems being passed to the consumer. So the inflation dispersion in the euro area, when you look at where we are, the Eurozone inflation at over 8%. But when you look at that high-low stat and you look at the different levels, you're seeing the rates continue to pull up, and that's pulling things higher. But as that does, the Eurozone real wage growth is -5%. So again, the pressure on the consumer is mounting as prices continue to go up, which is going to impact spending, which is where, when we start looking at, again, leading indicators. So as we remember, Eurozone saw some manufacturing increases in terms of the PMI. It was growth. You saw some of the confidence go up, but output is coming down. So when you look at output, when you look at some of those underlying leading indicators, it's now negative at -49.3, below 50, leading to and showing where some of the pressure is coming down the pike, which is when you start looking at France. Survey was for manufacturing PMI was for 54, came in at 51. Again, some of that negative drive. French consumer confidence was expected at 84, came in at 82. French consumer confidence, future financial situation is at -24 as well. So when you think about where things are, people, and it's interesting because when you look at France, no one's felt good about their situation in the last essentially 20 years. So that's also another problem that should probably be addressed. But when you start looking at the pressure here, you're getting the idea of what we've been discussing and what is going to be some of those drivers. Now, German manufacturing PMI, remember, it's an exporting nation, was expected at 54, came in at 52. But French PMI new orders came in at 45.9. So you're getting Germany slowing. And then when you look at the leading indicators for France, it is firmly negative. It is not waffling back and forth between 49, 51. You are at 45. You are clearly in contraction for new orders, which is, again, that leading indicator we've discussed. French manufacturing new export orders, 43.5. So you're not even just, you're just a huge drop off, but it's not just France. French new orders obviously were 43.5, but Germany, a net exporting nation, new orders are 42.2. So just get an idea of how that's such a huge contraction and a key leading indicator that is so far below 50, which is why we already believe that we're in a recession, and this is showing that is not getting any better. It's only getting worse as we head into Q3. So then when we start looking at the other key components of German new export orders. So new export orders, remember, new orders were 42. June, new export orders for Germany are 43.1. Another drop, again, a huge drop, especially given that they are an exporting nation. French manufacturing PMI backlog of work, 48.8. Again, contraction, leading indicator. Then you look at German future output is expected at 43.9. So again, below 50, still seeing the pressures, but all of these key pieces. Now, some of the areas or supplier delivery times are getting better. In the Eurozone, it's getting worse. So again, that's going to be another driver to inflation. We import from them. That's going to be added to our cost. So a lot of these key leading indicators are just showing how the pressure is only getting that much worse in the European theater. Now, French service PMI was expected at 57.5, came in at 54.4. German services PMI was expected at 54.5, came in at 52.4. Based on wage pressure, based on leading indicators, we expect at least Germany to go negative next month, but France to come closer to 50 and show that component. Especially when you start looking at German services PMI, incoming new business is now slightly in contraction at 49.4, which is why we have that confidence that we're going to see that drop. Now, French service PMI input price, again, pinned to the highs. Now, German service PMI input prices tagging exactly the highs. So again, you're not seeing deflation. You're not seeing further inflation. You're seeing stagnation, which is more of a global trend that we are seeing. And now the UK does not escape, with consumer confidence coming in at -41 versus the survey of -40. And then when you look at now we start coming into population and other types of pressures. So as population shrink, what's the best way to put it? As the available demographics get worse, that puts more and more pressure on spending, on housing, on just homes, and this becomes a big headwind for the economic expansion, which we which we know Europe has a very big problem when we're looking at underlying population. So German inflation was expected at 8.8, came in at 8.2. So, but you have to think about why it came in at 8.2. They had lower fuel tax, a discounted public transport costs, which slowed consumer prices to 8.2% versus in June. But analysts are, when you start looking at things, while providing some respite for Germany itself, the reading won't sway the European Central Bank from lifting interest rates for the first time in more than a decade next month. Inflation pressure remains intense elsewhere in the 19-member Eurozone. Spain reported a surprise jump to new all-time highs of over 10%. Again, so it's a mixed bag, but the movements are in the wrong direction. And now just showing you Spain. Spain was expected to come in at 8.7%, came in at 10%. Core CPI came in at 5.5%, again blasting to all-time new highs, and this is pulling down Italy. Manufacturing confidence was expected at 108.5, came in at 110, but consumer confidence expected at 103, came in at 98.3, again moving the wrong direction on the consumer side. And now when we start turning to Germany and we look at manufacturing, services, trade, construction, business expectations are still all negative. Some are getting a bit better in construction and slightly better in the service section. But again, all negative, all moving in the wrong direction heading into Q3. Excuse me. And when you start looking at consumer confidence elsewhere, survey was for 27.3, came in at 27.4. And then German PMI and German GDP all pointing towards a negative backdrop and again, I can't, there's not many other ways to say it. There are a lot of problems in Europe. And then the French business leaders increasingly anticipate stronger inflation. And again, there's nothing to say that they're wrong. There's everything to say that they're right. And it's only going to continue to get worse. So that's what we have for you for Europe. In the next segment, we're going to go deeper into Asia and what are some of the shifts that we're seeing there.